Kabul falls to the Taliban as the American era in Afghanistan comes to a chaotic end. Plus, a devastating earthquake in Haiti, new iPhones coming, and the rest of what you missed in a busy weekend. Monday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Monday, August 16th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hello, Carlo.
Good morning, Wags. Wow, what a weekend. And it is hard to be optimistic right now. It really feels like things are kind of falling apart. I'm trying over here.
Your best bet is to basically just not follow the news. Listen to this podcast, but that's about it. Because or else you'll just be, overwhelmed with bad news.
Yeah, it's been bad lately.
Okay, so let's talk about what's going on in Afghanistan. The Taliban now in control of the capital of that country for the first time since the 2001 U.S. invasion. Taliban forces swept through Kabul with ease in a single weekend, sending the Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, fleeing in exile, and American Chinook helicopters evacuating embassy staff in a chaotic scene reminiscent of the fall of Saigon. Video footage on Al Jazeera showed Taliban fighters inside the presidential palace after it was vacated by the U.S. government. The American flag no longer flying over the embassy in Kabul, as most personnel have now been moved to the airport, where thousands of Afghans have converged in the slim hopes of getting a flight out of the country. There's video going viral this morning of Afghans clinging to the side of a U.S. Air Force plane trying to take off. Just an absolute mess, Carlo.
Yeah, absolutely, Jill. $2 trillion, 2,500 dead American soldiers. God only knows how many dead Afghan civilians. And for what, I think, is the question on a lot of people's minds this morning. I think there are a lot of Americans of a certain age across this country this weekend who are looking at those pictures coming in and just saying to themselves, really? Again? Seriously? We're evacuating Americans by chopper out of an embassy again? Even if you support the end of the mission in Afghanistan, as I do, and I think most people do, at least judging by the polls, it is hard to imagine a more ignoble end than what we saw this weekend. But in my attempts to try and be optimistic lately, the only silver lining that I could come up with as I was thinking about this over the last couple of days is maybe this was – if you believe that this was going to happen in some version like this, maybe what happens here is we avoid a civil war like the one in Iraq that led to the formation of ISIS. And still, if these security forces that we spent $88 billion training over the last 20 years folded so quickly, was this ever going to be another way? Was this ever going to happen other than how it happened? Maybe ripping the Band-Aid off was the only thing there was to do here. But still, to have the Taliban, sitting behind the president's desk in the palace in Kabul while we are still getting our people out is a disaster any way you look at it. And it also puts an end to this fantasy that we're going to maintain some kind of diplomatic presence in that country. It's done. We're out. And
Carlo, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was dispatched to the Sunday shows to defend the White House's hasty withdrawal from the country, saying that the situation played out over the weekend was, quote, manifestly not Saigon. Blinken did acknowledge that the Afghan government collapsed more quickly than anticipated, perhaps the understatement of the year. Meanwhile, the Pentagon now sending another 1,000 troops to Kabul to secure the airport for the continuing evacuation of embassy personnel and Western diplomats. President Biden has been at Camp David and not scheduled to be back at the White House until Wednesday.
This whole thing, I think, politically speaking, major miscalculation on the part of the White House. I mean, obviously, I think that pretty much goes without saying. And regardless of what they say, what Blinken or anyone else in this administration says, this is not how they envisioned this going down, right? It's not. Republicans aren't the only ones that lie, right? Democrats lie to the American people, too. And it's also a reminder that the Pentagon lies, the Department of Defense lies. We've been told for years, Jill, that we were creating this security force in Afghanistan that was going to be able to stand on its own, at least for some period of time, and at least slow the Taliban's advance. And it folded like a cheap lawn chair over a weekend. I mean, it's astounding. It's just like we were told the South Vietnamese army was going to be able to stand on its own 50 years ago. Countries at war lie about the situation in war, which is why we shouldn't be in wars, in my opinion, unless absolutely necessary. In some ways, I almost don't even blame Biden for not listening to the generals anymore on this.
So there's been some great reporting from Western journalists who are still on the ground, including Clarissa Ward, Richard Engel in Kabul.
Engel's been amazing.
Richard, I mean, he is just the best. Okay, so from
man.
Richard's report on Meet the Press yesterday, this was before the Taliban officially took over. He said the mood is changing. The city felt different from the rest of Afghanistan. It was more cosmopolitan. It wanted to be an international hub. There was always some optimism. But now, again, the mood has changed. The city preparing for a Taliban takeover. And a lot of these people are thinking about what they are going to do. Many work for the U.S. military. It's not just translators. He says it's security guards, cleaners, cooks. He said that they used to film even in this beauty salon because it was just a good place to see modern women. And out front, there were always pictures of women with their hair and their makeup done. He said they've now painted over it. They've tore down the posters because they know that the Taliban is here and they can get into serious trouble, understatement, if those pictures are up.
Yeah, so the Biden administration, just in terms of some of the politics at play here, they're blaming. There's a lot of finger pointing going on right now, which just shows you that really nobody thought that this was going to go down the way it did. Biden administration blaming Trump, saying that he was the one who set the deadline in place with the Taliban, with that agreement that they made. And without the Afghan government in the room, not that it probably would have mattered much. And also that Trump was the one who negotiated this deal to free 5,000 Taliban prisoners from jail. But I mean, Trump, for the record, blaming Biden, as are many Republicans. There's plenty of blame to go around, I think, in this whole sad ending to this sort of sad era.
Look, a lot of people have pointed out, that Biden hasn't really followed many of Trump's policies, and he's overruled a lot of Trump's policies. So he very consciously chose to continue with this one. What's so striking to me here is just the inability of the Afghan security forces to defend the country. We invested, as you say, 20 years, billions of dollars. They have an air force. And not only can they not defend the country, they're not even trying. It's not like there's a fight and they lost. Richard Engel has used the word melting, but in some cases they are literally just handing over the cities to the Taliban or just leaving before the Taliban gets there. And what's worse, there are pictures of Afghan forces fleeing with all of the U.S. equipment, and they're going to Iran, which is going to love to get a very close look at all of our high-tech military equipment. We've talked about Taliban 2.0. You had hoped that maybe they would be more moderate as to just get some legitimacy on the international stage. Very clear that's not the case. Again, according to Richard Engel, who's there on the ground, Taliban 2.0, more brutal. And part of the reason, he says, is because they've been fighting against the best fighters in the world for the last 20 years. That's how you get good. You train against the best. They are now victorious against the United States. And now they have just a great recruitment tool for the jihadi movement. I think the question for us here in the United States, it's putting aside the humanitarian question, because Biden has already said, and I know that you've agreed with this, he's already said, women's rights, et cetera, in other parts of the world. Not that it's not his problem, but that's not what we use our U.S. military for. There are issues everywhere. Look at China, right? China's literally has a million Uyghur Muslims in basically concentration camps. Okay. So he's saying, that's not what we're going to send our men and women in for. But the question is the reason we went in the first place, is the Taliban going to harbor al-Qaeda, and will al-Qaeda attack us or our allies? And according to Richard Engel, already this weekend, thousands of al-Qaeda and Taliban prisoners free from jail. So, I mean, that's the question. At this point, does this pose any threat for us strategically?
Yeah, No, all good points, Jill. I mean, I think if what I would have done if I were the president, I mean, I would have announced the withdrawal as we did. I still think that we should have been out of there a long time ago. But I would have said, look, if you don't want to live under the rule of these religious fanatic psychos, you can leave. We'll resettle you. That would be politically and logistically quite difficult because there would probably be at least 1 million people who would take us up on that bet. But it would also be the right thing to do, and it would really probably the least we could have done for these people after the last 20 years. But the fact is, back to my point earlier, Americans don't care about Afghanistan. The polling shows this, and this could change. Part of me, I was thinking about this yesterday, thinks that this isn't even going to hurt Biden's numbers, because I just think a lot of people are so over what happens in that country. But then again, I was looking at the pictures, and pictures, as we know in this business, pictures speak louder than words. They matter. And the pictures this weekend, Jill, were absolutely nightmarish.
I mean, look, I know we're going to talk COVID in a few minutes, but between the awful COVID situation and now this, it's at this moment, it does not look good for Biden. Things change so quickly, though. There are reports, as you say, Biden overruled his many military advisors. Like, in terms of what were the other options here. Some advisors had said keep about 2,500 troops in the country, try to step up diplomacy, get some type of peace deal with the Taliban really in place, include the Afghan government. Again, not clear if ultimately there could have really been any other eventual outcome. There is an expression, NATO and the U.S. has the clock, but the Taliban has the time. So, that's why it could be a fool's errand.
And they've proven that they beat the Brits a long time ago. They beat the Soviets with that mantra. And now they've beat the Americans, the graveyard of empires. Once again, the thing that always is amazing about the Taliban is you look at these guys, and I mean, they're literally, walking around in sandals with like Kalashnikov rifles. They don't have any body armor. They don't have any helmets. They're driving around in like old Toyota pickup trucks. It's just amazing that they are able to wait out the force of the greatest military on earth the way that they have, right?
No, I mean, look, if you're looking for a little history or background on Afghanistan, by the way, I think Moshe, real friend of the pod, is doing a really nice job. His Instagram account at Moshe, Mosheh. He's got a little tab underneath his bio that says Afghanistan. He's got some good timelines in there and just some historical context if you're interested.
Nice.
Speaking of nightmarish pictures, at least 1,300 people are dead after a 7.2 earthquake struck off the coast of Haiti Saturday morning. More than 5,000 people were injured, thousands more displaced in a country that was already reeling from the pandemic and gang violence exacerbated by the recent assassination of its president. Local officials have had to negotiate with gangs to allow UN convoys to pass through some areas where humanitarian workers have been attacked.
Oh, God, these pictures are awful. The 2010 Haiti earthquake, that was also a 7.0 magnitude, I remember. And that one, 200,000 people.
It was actually less. It was 7.0. This was 7.2. It just luckily this one wasn't in as big of a hub, a residential hub.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I guess not to say that there's any good news here, but just I mean, honestly, I thought that the death toll may have actually ended up being higher when I saw this come across the transom on Saturday. Though it will surely rise, and just another terrible thing for these poor people. It's hard to imagine a country more unlucky than Haiti, right? It's just, I don't know what else to say. These poor people don't deserve any of this. And to make matters worse, Haiti is now in the path, Jill, of another tropical storm. Tropical storm Grace is now forecast to move over the island of Hispaniola today, bringing heavy rains with it that could hamper the recovery operation in Haiti. Grace, by the way, could eventually pose a threat to Texas later this week, so just keep an eye on that. The tropics are very active right now. We've also got Tropical Storm Fred. He is forecast to make landfall near Panama City, Florida later today. Storm surge warnings are in effect up and down the Florida Panhandle this morning.
I kind of think Grace is not an appropriate name for a hurricane. Right? I mean, Grace is like goodwill.
Yeah.
I don't know. It does not feel
I think they should change
like
the whole. I think they should change the whole dynamic with the naming. It should just be like the alphabet, like the Greek alphabet or something. Although that would get in the way of our other major crisis of COVID. Oh man, I'm trying, Jill.
And they do the Greek alphabet, right? After they're
When we
already
run out,
finished with
yeah,
when they run out of names, which has actually happened recently. Okay, the Biden
yeah.
administration, speaking of COVID, considering whether to offer vaccine booster shots to elderly Americans and healthcare workers this fall, as the director of the NIH is warning that the U.S. is on track to see more than 200,000 new cases a day in the next couple of weeks. Think about that. That would approach the level of new cases this country was tallying at the height of last winter's surge, when we were notching 250,000 new cases a day before there were vaccines, Carlo. What a failure
How,
here. I mean,
how
my
did how
God.
did we how did we get here, Jill? The problem with my sort of half-assed theory on Friday that Delta maybe is going to be over soon because there's just been so much spread, it is, and again, I'm hoping that that's the case. I'm grasping at straws here, but the problem with that theory is that it's easy to forget, as I did, that the more this thing mutates, right, or the more this thing spreads, the more mutations it get, and the more mutations there are, the more chances there are that we're going to get one that's way worse than Delta and that actually renders these vaccines impotent or basically useless. And then what? That's sort of my nightmare scenario with COVID right now. If that happens, then what? We're back in March 2020. I mean, can you even imagine? And even if it doesn't happen here, that's probably going to happen somewhere else. Less than 20% of the global population is vaccinated right now, putting aside all of our problems, right?
It is awful, Carlo, and not that this is all about the kids, but this is now about people who are too young to be vaccinated.
Yeah.
Okay, and look, I'm still home. We're sort of in this quarantine. I spoke to my daughter's pediatrician, and I asked her what we should be looking for in terms of symptoms. She said COVID for kids, especially with Delta, can be nothing or everything.
Yeah.
It's just wild. And that's what's so difficult about it. Some kids have fevers, some don't, some lose their sense of smell, some don't. My daughter had this like kind of 24-hour stomach bug last week. And now I'm wondering, was that maybe COVID? And it's kind of like you just don't know. I
Yeah.
will say we were contacted by contact tracers, which I thought was
That's
good.
good.
We were contacted, I think it was Friday, and she was exposed Monday. So I thought that was a problem because they didn't know if we knew. So that meant that
Hmm.
there were 5 days basically before we were contacted after exposure that we
Right.
were actually contacted by a contact tree. Of course, we knew because the camp had told us and she wasn't in camp. But we get a text message every day asking how she's doing. At least there's some infrastructure in place at this point.
Yeah. She doesn't have any symptoms right now, right?
Knock on wood, she's okay. We're actually going to get her tested today
Okay.
because I didn't want to have to do it twice.
Yeah.
Just
Can you
because it's
test kids for
torturous for these little.
antibodies?
I am going to test her for antibodies as well. I have never tested her yet, and the doctor said it's too soon. If we think that what she may have had last week or like 2 weeks ago may
Yeah.
have been COVID, she said just wait another couple of weeks so that you'll get a better picture of the
Yeah.
antibodies. So we're going to do it then. But really scary. And look, kids are going back to school. Schools are trying to figure out
Yeah.
their plans. I think I can't even believe I'm going to say this, but it feels like with Delta being so much more contagious, that this has the potential to be an even more chaotic school year than last year.
Oh my God, it's amazing. The other thing about this, and I won't go on, but it's just like, how is it possible that we have not figured out the testing scenario in this country yet? Why are we not doing rapid tests at every entrance of every office building, of every school? I mean, they sell these things in CVS now, right? We have the
Well,
technology.
and not only that, I don't know. I don't know if the guidelines have changed because we've actually never been under an official quarantine. We've had situations where the school that my daughter's at has went so above and beyond in a good way to just keep everyone safe that if there was possible exposure, like then you had to sort of quarantine. This is the first official quarantine that we've been
Right.
under, and you actually don't need a test to get out of quarantine. So they just say wait the 10 days, and if you don't have symptoms, you're fine. Like
Yeah.
go back into the world, which I guess that kind of makes sense. But at the same time, given the fact that you can really be asymptomatic, I would think a test, what would be the harm in having to test everybody?
Yeah. No, I agree completely.
Okay, so this is the time of year when iPhone users thinking about upgrading should consider holding off. Apple widely expected to launch new iPhone models next month, a so-called mid-cycle update that's likely to include a better camera, faster speeds, and a smaller notch. The industry consensus is that Apple will call it the iPhone 13, despite speculation that the company would skip the unlucky number as a way, like how some buildings skip the 13th floor. I lived on the 14th
For people like
floor.
you.
I lived on the 14th floor in my old building, but it really was the 13th floor because there just was no 13.
My sister she used to live on the 13th floor of a building that was, the number of the building was 666. I always thought that was so funny. But she was okay. I read something actually about Apple recently, and I forget where now, but I'll try and dig it up. But it was really interesting. It was talking about how Apple's strategy now is to keep making the camera better and the chips faster in these phones, because what does that mean? It means that all of this files and everything, apps are bigger, which means that you need more cloud storage for all of your stuff. So games take more memory, your photos take up more space because they're higher resolution, which means that you need more storage, which means more money for them. It's sort of like this flywheel effect. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. But I have my iPhone 12 and I'm perfectly happy with it.
How much better can these cameras get? I don't even understand.
That's what I always wonder. I was looking at we bought my mother-in-law a new iPad. It's unbelievable. Have you seen the screens on these things? It's crazy.
No.
It looks like it's unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. I couldn't even believe it, frankly.
And finally, HBO's been listening to you, Carlo, working on fixing its glitch-prone app. Warner Media reportedly in the process of replacing all of its HBO Max smart TV apps in the next few months. The Roku and PlayStation platforms are getting fixed first, followed by Apple TV, and then the mobile and desktop sites. Unlike other media companies that built their streaming apps from scratch, HBO Max was slapped together on top of the existing HBO Go software, leading to complaints of poor performance ever since it launched last May.
I'm just happy to be of service here. If I can get your HBO Max app fixed, all good. By the way, speaking of HBO, nobody talked to me today anywhere on social media or elsewhere about the White Lotus finale. I have not watched. We will be watching tonight, and then we can discuss. Have you caught up?
I'm totally caught up. I haven't watched the finale, although I'm very upset that it's the finale. I just thought there were going to be like 3 or 4 more episodes. I'm kind of bummed. It's so good.
But they're doing a second season, so at least we'll get it again. Although it won't be as good. It never is.
Someone who listens to the podcast messaged me on Instagram a really funny meme. I forwarded it to you, but I don't know if you got it. It was from Jack William RTF. The HBO Max app is designed like they're mad at you for using it.
It's so true.
It's kind of true. It is so hard to navigate.
We were watching The Wire last night, and just mid-show, it just was like, nope, error, nope. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I can't watch that anymore. All right.
All right. That is what you need to know for Monday, August 16th.
All right, folks. We'll see you tomorrow. Hang tight.